Hi, are all the healthy foods you're eating actually good for you? Or actually basically a discussion on food sensitivities. My name is Barbara Solomon. I'm a board certified nutrition specialist and certified functional medicine practitioner. Before we get started, I'm going to need to go over a disclaimer. First of all, the following is going to be for information only and not intended to be used to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any illness. That's what your doctor's for. So this shouldn't be considered medical advice, and you should definitely see your licensed medical doctor if you have any issue with your health. Okay, maybe you're the person that eats the perfect diet. You're eating plenty of whole foods, organic grains, fresh fruits, lots of green vegetables, grass-fed beef, wild-caught salmon, and all those great things. But what if I told you maybe some of those foods that you're eating may not be the best for your health? So to get started, let's talk about the difference between food sensitivities, intolerances, and allergies. And this is really important because people tend to use these terms interchangeably. But the big picture is it's really about whether or not the immune system is involved and how the immune system is involved. So when we talk about a food allergy, we are talking about a frank, immediate, dramatic response. This is when somebody's going to have problems with swelling and airway constriction and hives and a rash. And the foods that usually tend to bring this on are things like fish and peanuts and eggs and nuts and strawberries or whatever it is for the particular individual. Now, when we talk about a sensitivity, it's a completely different thing. It too brings up an immune response, but it's not so dramatic and it can actually be quite subtle. Instead of being a really immediate immune response, food sensitivities tend to be longer term. For instance, you could have a sensitivity to a dairy product, and that may affect you for hours to days after you've consumed that. Or you can consume something like gluten, which in the literature shows that it can last up to like 8 months. So the effects are going to be, maybe longer term, they're going to be less, they're going to be more subtle, and the outcome can really vary depending on the individual. So everybody's going to express these a little difference. Now, finally, when we talk about a food intolerance, we're talking about the inability of the body to break down the food. And this doesn't involve the immune system at all. It really involves the ability of the gastrointestinal system to do the job that it's designed to do. So here are some of the common signs of food sensitivities. Things like food cravings, shiners under the eyes, skin rashes, fatigue, headache, weight gain, inflammation, depression, gut issues. And this list is no way complete. It depends on the individual how they express these sensitivities. So if we take a big picture approach to this, really why we develop food sensitivities is what generates an immune response. And in this particular case, there's lots of different factors that can do that. There's the introduction of GMO foods. These foods are relatively new to the human experience, and our immune system really doesn't really know what to do with these foods. It looks at it as a foreign antigen and decides it has to mount some kind of response. There's the way that we process our foods that change the properties that may confuse the body and create an immune response. How about how we store our foods? For instance, we store our grains for long periods of time that go ahead and create enterotoxin contamination that's going to initiate an immune response. If you have poor digestion and you don't break down your foods, that can change your gut flora, that can lead to leaky gut, that can go ahead and cause an immune system response as these partially processed foods are sent out into the bloodstream. There's issues with timing of exposure. We feed our infants dairy products at a very young age when their gut system has not been fully developed, and these partially processed foods go out this kind of holy system, so to speak, or their leaky gut type of scenario going on, and that can create an immune system response as well. Chronic stress can lead to problems with digestion. It can go ahead and change gut flora. It can lead to leaky gut. It can lead to inflammation, and that can create an immune system response. If we have poor nutrition and overexposure to particular types of foods, that may go ahead and create problems with malabsorption, and that may create an immune response as well. There's chemical exposures, there's things like genetic, so there's lots of different factors why someone may develop issues with food sensitivities. The most common problematic foods include gluten and cow dairy, and I'll just let you know that cow dairy is much different than sheep, goat, or buffalo, so a lot of people can successfully substitute those dairy products. Foods such as nightshade, which include tomato, potato, peppers, and eggplant, foods such as that. Latex foods such as bananas, mangoes, kiwis, papaya, avocado, but I tend to really avoid taking avocado out of the diet. Peanuts, which are not a nut, but actually a legume. Artificial sweeteners, food additives, artificial colors, and foods such as soy. Those are really problematic foods. Now, in addition to gluten, there's also something called gluten cross-cousin foods. And these are foods that can appear to the body like gluten, even though they are not gluten-containing foods. So these, as you can see from the list, they're quite diverse. There's many different types of grains on here, but there's also foods like yeast and coffee and corn and eggs and milks and tapioca and potatoes. And so the body can respond to these foods just like you've eaten gluten. And if you are a person that is gluten sensitive in any way, you may also be sensitive to several of these kinds of foods. So the way that it looks is like this. So here we have a body's response to a true component of gluten, which in this case is gliadin. And as you can see, that's kind of like a lock and key. So here's this number 1. This is the actual gliadin molecule. And here's the body's response to it. And you can see, hey, I'm looking for something that looks like gliadin, I'm going to create an immune response. Now, if we go over here and we look at the cross-reactive or the cross-cousin kinds of foods, same kind of scenario. We have number 2. And if you notice, it is also an antigen, but in this case, it's some kind of dairy. And it fits 2 of the 3 places that the body would respond for gluten. So even though this isn't gluten, it's responding though it is a gluten molecule. And then finally, we have something in this case, this particular person is eating some rice. And this is number 3 over here. And you can see it fits one of the areas to create an immune response, but not all 3. And therefore, that particular person will not have an immune response to that. But you can see from this quite easily that, wow, even if you don't eat gluten and you eat something that looks like gluten, the body can create an immune response from that. So how or why is this happening? When the body mounts a response against gluten, it's mounting a response against the protein component of gluten. In this case, it could be gliadin or it could be glutenin. Now, we do know that proteins are made up of a sequence of amino acids. And if we go ahead and imagine a protein as a beaded necklace, we can get a really good idea of what's going on. So let's say that the string on the top is gluten and the string on the bottom is dairy. And as you can see, even though the 2 strings are different, there's a sequence of amino acids where they're actually identical. And this is where the immune system can become confused and can go ahead and say, wow, this is gluten. The string on the bottom is gluten, even though it's not. It's similar enough in structure that the immune system becomes easily confused. Now, in addition to specific foods, an individual may be sensitive to compounds contained within that food. So maybe there's an individual that's sensitive to lectins, and they might be sensitive to many of the different foods containing lectins. And that also holds true with foods that contain either phenols or histamines or glutamates and sulfites. So it may be that the individual is sensitive to the foods because of the components that's contained within those foods. In addition, an individual might be sensitive to an entire family of foods. So let's take rose, for example. Rose contains things like strawberries and nectarines and peaches and plums. So an individual may be sensitive to the entire line of foods in that family. So what it boils down to is what we're really concerned with is inflammation. Now, most sensitivities lead to an immune response, but there's certain foods that don't, such as glutenin, which is one of the components of gluten, and lectins. They can go ahead and create inflammation, and there's nothing to ward it off. They don't notify the immune system that there's anything to do, and it's just sitting there and being inflamed and inflamed and inflamed, and ultimately that can affect the way that you can absorb your foods. Now, there's other things besides malabsorption that can cause immune response. So there's things like drugs and physical stress and infections and neurotransmitters and things of that nature. And what happens when these substances start to affect our gut lining starts to develop holes. It becomes quite leaky. And then we're allowing partially processed food to go out in the bloodstream that is going to create an immune response. So much so that it keeps the immune system very busy. Now, many times the immune system may confuse those foods that are running around in the bloodstream with various organs or tissues in the bodies, and that can ultimately lead to autoimmunity. And that's what we have to be concerned with. We've got to be concerned with an overactive immune system that's going to wreak havoc on our health. Now, when you start to have this happening, you can start to develop things such as diabetes or Hashimoto's, rheumatoid arthritis, and the list goes on and on. You can have things such as, obesity and migraines and fatigue and multiple sclerosis and increased risk for very serious illnesses. So this is stuff that we really do need to pay attention to. And so if we are able to go ahead and find our food sensitivities, we're going to have a much better chance of being able to ward off disease. So let's go ahead and look at gluten, for example. It has been linked in the literature to over 55 diseases so far, most of them autoimmune, and most of them not just against the gut. As you can see here, they're attacking various organs around the body. Now, if that isn't motivation enough for you, this usually is. Inflammation leads to weight gain. If you can remove these foods you're sensitive to, you can bring down the immune response, you're going to calm down the adrenal glands, and you're going to lose weight. So how do you tell if you have problems with foods? There are blood tests that you can do, and one of the best labs that I know of is Cyrex lab testing, where they go ahead and they actually test for the foods in the way that you actually eat them. So instead of just testing for an egg, they're going to test for a cooked egg, because I don't know about you, but I don't think raw eggs are a big part of my diet. There's other things you can do called the Coca Pulse test. It's an at-home test, and the idea is that if there's a food that is possibly inflammatory to you, it can cause your heart rate to increase. So some people have a really good result with playing around with the Coca Pulse test. For me and my clients, what we really use in the office is the elimination diet. And the whole idea of the elimination diet is to go ahead and take away these known inflammatory foods for a period of 4 to 6 weeks and then add them back in a systematic manner. This gives the immune system a chance to go on vacation for 30 days. It can relax, it can repair, it can rebuild itself, so that when you go ahead and reintroduce these foods, you're going to know it. It goes ahead and attacks with great vigor and intensity and says, yeah, I don't like that food, boom! And so you can get a really good idea of which foods you're sensitive to and which foods you're not. So let's just go over a summary. Health effects of undiagnosed sensitivities are far-reaching and can affect all parts of the body. You may be sensitive to foods and have absolutely no GI symptoms, but maybe you have problems in your joints. Maybe you're not thinking clearly. Maybe you gained weight, those kinds of things. There are many types of proteins that can cause health issues, including unsuspected and cross-reactive foods like we talked about with the gluten. Maybe you're eating dairy, but your body's confusing that with gluten and creating an immune response. There's issues with foods that can cause inflammation, and immune responses over time and with great intensity can lead to autoimmunity. And really, it's a hard thing to be able to test for this stuff, but the best thing you can do for yourself is to give yourself a 30-day elimination trial. So I thank you again for your time and joining me this evening. If you'd like to learn more about functional medicine, clinical nutrition, you can check us out at functionalhealthforyou.com, or we've just written a new book, Eliminating the Pain of the Elimination Diet. It's a functional medicine approach to diet and health-related issues. Again, thank you very, very much for your time. Just greatly appreciate it. Good night.